I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, not in a thrill-seeking way, but more of a genuine curiosity about what lies beyond the veil. So when I stumbled upon an online auction claiming to sell a cursed painting, I couldn't resist. It wasn't the usual gothic imagery or disturbing faces you'd expect. In fact, it was rather mundane. A simple landscape of an old, decaying house nestled within a foggy forest. The seller's description was brief, almost careless. No grand stories of previous owners meeting tragic fates. Just a warning. Asterisk, don't keep it for too long. Asterisk, I assumed it was just a gimmick to add some mystique to a boring piece of art, but something about the painting stuck with me. I clicked buy now without a second thought. It arrived a week later, packaged in a weathered box that looked far older than it should have been. There were no packing peanuts or bubble wrap, just the painting, wrapped in brittle brown paper. I noticed a faint smell of mildew as I tore the paper away, revealing the canvas. The details were sharper in person. The gnarled trees surrounding the house seemed to bend toward the viewer, as if trying to escape the confines of the frame. And the house, it felt wrong, like it was watching me, despite having no windows. I hung it up in my living room, more for the novelty than anything else. That first night, nothing happened. But by the second night, I began hearing things. It started with faint, barely audible sounds. At first, I thought it was just the creaking of the house, typical for an old building like mine. But these noises were different, rhythmic, like the murmur of voices from far away. I checked my phone, the TV, even went outside to see if neighbors were having a late-night conversation. Nothing. I dismissed it, figuring my mind was playing tricks on me. The next morning, I noticed something off about the painting. The fog that surrounded the house seemed thicker, like it had crept further into the frame. I couldn't remember it being so dense. I chalked it up to a trick of the light and left for work, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched as I walked out the door. That night, the noises returned, louder this time. The whispering seemed to be coming from the direction of the painting. I stood in front of it, staring into the scene. The fog was thicker than ever, and the house looked almost closer. My eyes lingered on the door. An ugly, dark stain that almost looked like a knock echoed through the room. I froze, heart racing. It wasn't coming from the front door. It was from the painting. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. I stared, half expecting the canvas to move. My hands trembled as I reached for the frame, yanking it off the wall. The knocking stopped immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind that crawls into your bones and stays there. I threw the painting into the closet, slammed the door shut, and decided that was enough for the night. But when I woke up, the painting was back on the wall. The painting was hung in the exact same spot, as if it had never been moved. My stomach churned at the sight. I could have sworn I'd shoved it into the back of the closet, buried beneath coats and boxes. My heart pounded in my chest, each thud echoing in the empty room. I told myself I must have been half asleep, that I only imagined putting it away. That had to be it. But the changes were undeniable now. The fog had thickened so much it swallowed almost everything in the background. The house, once distant, was now looming in the foreground. The door that I had stared at the night before was more detailed, as if it had been freshly painted. The dark stain on its surface had spread, trickling down the wood like blood seeping from a wound. I didn't have time to deal with this. I was late for work and already spooked enough. I left the house in a hurry. The image of that creeping house burned into my mind. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I glanced into the rearview mirror, it felt like I caught a fleeting glimpse of something in the back seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, eyes fixed on the road ahead. That night, things escalated. I got home later than usual, hoping that the exhaustion from work would drown out the growing unease. But as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed the change immediately. The room was freezing. I checked the thermostat. Everything was fine. Then I saw the painting. It had changed again. The fog was now swirling within the frame, almost alive, curling around the house like skeletal fingers. The front door was wide open. It hadn't been before. I stood there, mouth dry, staring into the gaping black void that replaced the door. The house in the painting felt like it was waiting for me. Suddenly, the whispering began again. Only this time, it wasn't faint or distant. It was loud, coming from every direction. A chorus of overlapping voices. They were speaking words I couldn't understand, yet the meaning was unmistakable. They wanted me to come closer. I stepped forward, against every instinct screaming in my head to stop. The voices grew louder, frantic, pleading. The fog in the painting swirled faster, and I could swear I saw something moving inside the doorway. My body was frozen in place, my feet refusing to back away. Then, without warning, the knocking started again, louder than before. This time, it wasn't just 3 knocks. It was continuous, frantic, like something was trying to break through. The sound reverberated through the house, shaking the walls. I could feel the vibrations in my chest, as though the knocking was inside me. I finally broke free of whatever had me rooted to the spot and grabbed the painting off the wall. I didn't care where it came from or how much I had paid for it. I wanted it gone. But as soon as my fingers touched the frame, the whispers stopped. The knocking fell silent, and for a brief moment, the room was deathly still. Then I saw it. Something was moving inside the painting. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks again, but as I stared, I realized it was real. A figure, barely visible through the thick fog, was stepping out of the house. It was small at first, but as it moved closer to the foreground, I could make out its features. It wasn't human. Its limbs were unnaturally long, bending at odd angles as it dragged itself forward. Its skin, if it could even be called that, was a pale, mottled gray, stretched tight over its skeletal frame. Where its face should have been, there was only a void, black and featureless. The figure lurched forward in slow, deliberate steps, its eyeless gaze locked on me. My breath caught in my throat as I watched in horror. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The thing in the painting was getting closer, its misshapen body filling the frame. It wasn't just an image anymore. It was something else entirely, something trying to break free. I threw the painting to the floor, smashing the glass as it hit the hardwood. The figure inside twitched, its head jerking toward me, and for a split second, I swore it reached out, its long, bony fingers stretching through the shattered glass. I ran. I locked myself in my bedroom, heart racing, ears straining for any sound from the living room. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too scared to move, too terrified to sleep. I didn't dare go back into the living room until the sun came up. When I finally opened the door, the painting was gone. But the whispers, they never stopped. I stood in the empty living room, my eyes scanning every corner. The painting was gone, but the air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't see. The whispers were still there, low, persistent, circling around me like invisible vultures waiting to swoop in. I should have felt relief. After all, the painting was gone, wasn't it? But the uneasy silence made it clear. It wasn't over. I could still feel that thing, whatever it was, lingering in the house. I spent the next few days trying to convince myself it had all been in my head. Stress, maybe, lack of sleep. But each night, when the sun dipped below the horizon, the whispers would return. They grew louder, closer, and soon I could feel the presence in the house with me. It was as if the thing from the painting had seeped out into the very walls, like it was still watching, still waiting. Then the knocks started again. It was subtle at first, just a faint tap, as if someone was gently rapping on the walls of my house. I ignored it the first few times, but as the days wore on, the knocking grew more aggressive. I checked every room, every door, every window, but there was no one there. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within. One night, after the knocking reached a crescendo that rattled my entire house, I made the decision to leave. I wasn't safe here. Whatever I had unleashed, it wasn't confined to the painting anymore. I packed a bag and booked a hotel in the next town over, determined to get as far away as possible. As I drove, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. My grip on the steering wheel was tight, knuckles white, but I kept telling myself this was the right decision. Just a few days away, and maybe the haunting would subside. Maybe the thing would lose its hold on me if I wasn't there. But then I saw it. In the rearview mirror, through the inky black of the night, I could just make out the shape of something. It was in the back seat. My heart leaped into my throat. I slammed the brakes, the car screeching to a stop on the deserted road. My hands shook as I turned around, fully expecting to see that faceless figure from the painting crawling toward me. But the back seat was empty. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I forced myself to keep driving. My mind was playing tricks, that's all. I just needed to get to the hotel, get some sleep. That's when I noticed something even worse. The whispers. They weren't faint anymore. They were right there in the car with me. No, not just with me, they were in my head. Louder and louder, overlapping voices, each one dripping with malice, like they were burrowing into my skull. And then came the words, "Asterisk, come back. Asterisk." I swerved, nearly veering off the road, my pulse hammering in my ears. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look in the mirror again. The voices were relentless now, repeating the same phrase over and over. "Asterisk, come back. Come back. Asterisk." When I finally reached the hotel, I stumbled inside, my mind spinning. The lobby was eerily quiet, the clerk barely acknowledging me as I fumbled through the check-in. I just needed sleep, I told myself. But deep down, I knew sleep wouldn't come. The room was small and unremarkable, just 4 walls and a bed. But at least it was far from that house. Or so I thought. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob for good measure, and collapsed onto the bed. My head was pounding, but at least the whispers were gone. For a while, the silence was comforting. But then, as the minutes ticked by, I began to hear it again. Faint at first, almost like wind. But there was no wind. The window was shut, and the room was still. I bolted upright, and that's when I saw it. The painting. It was hanging on the wall, right across from the bed, exactly as it had been in my living room. The house was closer now, practically spilling out of the frame. The door was wide open, and the fog roiled like a living thing, almost reaching out of the painting itself. But that wasn't the worst part. Inside the doorway, there was movement. The figure was back. But this time, it was no longer trapped inside the painting. It stood at the threshold, its form more distinct than ever. Its limbs were still grotesquely long, twisting in ways no human body should move. And its face, or what should have been its face, was turning toward me. I scrambled off the bed, my back pressed against the opposite wall, trying to figure out how it had followed me. My breathing was shallow, heart threatening to explode from my chest as I realized the truth. It had never left. The figure stepped out of the painting. I could hear the wet, sickening sound of its feet hitting the floor. It was coming for me. My body moved on instinct, legs trembling as I backed away toward the door, but I couldn't tear my eyes from it. The thing's head jerked in my direction, and I knew it had finally come for me. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony in my mind, as the figure crept closer, its faceless void seeming to widen, like it was about to swallow me whole. My fingers fumbled with the doorknob, too panicked to turn it. Then, everything went black. I woke to darkness. At first, I couldn't remember where I was. My heart pounded in my chest as my mind scrambled to piece together the last few moments. The hotel room, the painting, that thing. I wasn't in the hotel anymore. The air was thick, damp, and cold, like I had stepped into a forgotten tomb. I tried to sit up, but something was wrong. The ground beneath me felt soft, spongy, almost like soil. My hands sank into it as I pushed myself up, the coldness seeping into my skin. My head throbbed, and a sickening dread washed over me as I realized I wasn't alone. The whispers were back, louder than before, surrounding me from all sides. They sounded closer now, as though whoever or whatever was whispering was just out of sight. I blinked, straining my eyes in the pitch black, but I could see nothing, just the void. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, the only source of light I could hope for. My fingers were trembling, almost numb, as I flicked it on. The weak glow illuminated my surroundings for only a few feet, but it was enough. I was no longer in the hotel room. I wasn't even anywhere I recognized. I was standing in the forest from the painting. The gnarled, twisted trees surrounded me, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The fog hung heavy in the air, swirling around my legs, almost as if it were alive. And in the distance, barely visible through the thick mist, was the house. The same house from the painting, looming in the shadows like it had been waiting for me all along. Its decayed walls were closer now, more real than ever, and the door was open. Again, I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone in the process. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. I tried to steady my breath, but it was impossible. I was inside the painting. The realization hit me like a hammer to the chest. Then I heard it, a low, scraping sound, like something being dragged across the ground. I swung the light around, desperate to find the source. The fog was too thick, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it was just beyond the edge of the light. I caught a glimpse, something long, something pale and twisted. My stomach churned as I realized what it was. It was crawling toward me, the thing from the painting. I bolted. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through mud, but I didn't care. I needed to get away from that thing, from the house, from whatever hellish nightmare I had stumbled into. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps as I stumbled through the trees, the whispers chasing me, mocking me. But no matter how far I ran, the house stayed in my sight. It was always there, just beyond the fog, like a predator waiting for its prey to tire. I could feel it, pulling me closer, dragging me back. No matter which direction I turned, no matter how hard I pushed my legs to move, I always ended up facing the house again. And the door was still open. I don't know what possessed me, but I stopped running. The whispers were deafening now, the fog so thick it was choking me. My body trembled as I slowly turned toward the house. The air around me seemed to vibrate, alive with some dark force that I couldn't escape. The scraping sound was back, closer this time. I didn't want to look, but I knew I had to. The thing was behind me, its long, spindly limbs dragging across the ground as it crawled closer. Its faceless head jerked in unnatural movements, as though it were trying to locate me through some unseen sense. It was slow but deliberate, each movement methodical, like it knew there was no point in rushing. I felt something shift in the air. It was subtle, a barely noticeable change, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I was being watched. Not by the creature, it was something else, something bigger. The house was alive. I could feel its attention on me, drawing me in like an insect caught in a web. My feet moved on their own, the pull from the house growing stronger with every step. The whispers turned into a chorus, louder and louder, urging me forward. I was walking toward the open door, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to stop. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't obey. I was being pulled in, step by step, closer to whatever lay inside. The fog thickened, wrapping around me like a shroud, until I was standing at the threshold of the house. The inside was pure darkness. I could hear something breathing, slow, ragged breaths coming from the depths of the void inside. My mind screamed at me to run, to fight whatever invisible force was dragging me into that blackness, but it was useless. The whispers were in my head, louder than ever, filling every corner of my mind until I couldn't think of anything else. "Come in," they whispered, asterisk. "It's been waiting for you," asterisk. With one last gasp of resistance, I fought against the pull, my muscles screaming as I tried to step back. And for a moment, I thought I had broken free. I took a shaky step away from the door, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. Then I felt it. A cold, bony hand closed around my ankle. The faceless thing had reached me. Its grip tightened, icy and unforgiving, pulling me down. My scream was swallowed by the fog as I hit the ground, the thing dragging me closer to the doorway, toward the endless black. My nails scraped against the earth, desperate to find something, anything, to hold on to, but there was nothing. I was being pulled inside, and as the darkness swallowed me, The last thing I heard was the door slamming shut behind me. The darkness was suffocating. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I clawed at the ground, dirt slipping through my fingers as the faceless thing dragged me deeper into the void. Every muscle in my body screamed, but it was no use. The whispers had changed. No longer pleading, they were laughing, cruel and mocking. The thing's grip tightened around my ankle, cold and inescapable, pulling me further into the blackness. The air grew thicker, heavier, like the very space around me was alive, pressing down on me. I struggled to keep my eyes open, but I could see nothing. No light, no hope, only darkness. Suddenly, I felt the ground beneath me shift, like it was tilting. I tumbled forward, losing my balance as the cold hands released their grip. My body hit something hard, wood. I was inside the house now, but the house wasn't empty. As my eyes adjusted to the thick gloom, I realized I was no longer alone. Figures lined the walls, their shapes barely visible in the dim, flickering light. They were still, too still, like mannequins placed in unnatural positions, but I knew they weren't mannequins. They were people once. Their bodies were gaunt, twisted, skin stretched tight over bones. Their mouths hung open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. They were frozen in place, trapped in the house for God knows how long. And as I stared, I realized with growing horror that they weren't just trapped. They were waiting for me. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my ears with their relentless chorus. I could hear them clearer now. Each voice was distinct, layered with different tones. Men, women, children, all speaking in unison. Their message was clear. Asterisk, you belong here. Asterisk. I staggered backward, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I had to get out. I spun around, searching for the door, but it was gone. The walls closed in, warped and distorted, like the house itself was shifting, reshaping itself to trap me inside. That's when I felt the cold breath on the back of my neck. Slowly, I turned around. The thing from the painting stood inches away from me, its face, or lack thereof, mere inches from mine. It towered over me, its limbs impossibly long and thin, its body swaying unnaturally. The faceless void where its head should be tilted, as if it were studying me, savoring the fear that radiated off me in waves. I tried to move, but I was frozen. My legs refused to obey, my body locked in place as the thing leaned closer, its breath cold and rancid, brushing against my skin. I could feel it staring, even though it had no eyes. Somehow it was seeing right through me. The whispers grew louder, frantic now, as if they were excited. The figures lining the walls began to move, ever so slightly, their heads twitching toward me, their dead eyes following my every movement. And then the thing spoke. Asterisk, you brought us here. Asterisk. Its voice was a low, guttural rasp, like it hadn't spoken in centuries. The sound of it was wrong, like nails scraping against my soul. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my throat. You opened the door, it continued, asterisk, and now you will stay, asterisk. I could feel its cold fingers brush against my arm, its touch sending a jolt of ice through my body. I wanted to pull away, to run, but I couldn't. The house had me now. It had always had me. With a slow, deliberate movement, the thing reached out and touched my face. My skin burned at its touch, a searing cold that sent shockwaves of pain through my body. I could feel it drawing something from me, draining me, as if it were pulling the very life out of my bones. I watched in horror as my reflection appeared in the windows of the house. Distorted, gaunt, my eyes wide with terror, just like the others. My skin began to stretch, growing tight and pale, my body shrinking as I was absorbed into the walls. I was becoming like them, part of the house. The whispers were no longer distant. They were inside me now, filling every corner of my mind. My thoughts blurred, my memories fading as the thing continued to pull me into the darkness. I could feel the house wrapping around me, claiming me, binding me to its will. And then, as my vision began to blur and fade, I saw it. The painting, hanging on the wall right in front of me, just as it had been in my living room. The house was in the distance again, the fog swirling around it. But this time, the door was open wide, and inside the house, I saw myself. My twisted, decayed form standing at the threshold, waiting. My hollow eyes stared back at me from within the painting, trapped forever. The thing stepped back, satisfied, as the house shifted once more, sealing me within its walls. I was part of it now. I was one of them, and as the last remnants of my mind slipped away, I realized the truth. I had never left. The painting had been a door all along, and now it would wait for the next curious soul to open it, to let us in.